Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show, by any host, or by any guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before you begin any new diet, exercise, or training program. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. On Healing Ties, we're creating a life to love after caregiving ends by sharing stories and resources and being with awesome people like you. Now that caregiving has ended, let the Healing Ties begin. Here's your host, Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy.
Well, greetings everyone. It is Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy, for another episode of Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. Thanks for joining me today. Also want to send out a hello and a shout out to all our friends over in the UK on ukhealthradio.com. We certainly thank you for your continued support of the show, as we do thank all of our listeners. We've just started to get a lot of great feedback about the Whole Care Network and all of our shows. I encourage all of our listeners on Healing Ties to check out all of our shows on the Whole Care Network. We're featuring 15 different shows right now, and our new podcast series are live and available as well, and those are located under our resource tabs on the Whole Care Network. So, like right now, our new podcast series featuring mature market expert and author Joy Laverty is active, starting today actually. Joy's book, Who Will Take Care of Me When I'm Old, is actually the centerpiece of her podcast series, which is entitled The Unique Needs of the Older Caregiver. Our podcast series featuring the caregiver lawyer Amanda Singleton is now live on thewholecarenetwork.com. Amanda has an amazing caregiving story that actually transformed her practice from that of a trial attorney to being an advocate for caregivers on the Whole Care Network, and our resource tabs are aligned with our 4 pillars on the Whole Care Network, which is our emotional, physical, spiritual, and financial health. So check out all of our resources and podcast series on thewholecarenetwork.com. Well, let's get to today. Goodness, I've been excited about our guest, as I met our guest just a couple of weeks ago at the National Alliance for Caregiving Conference, the 12th annual conference engaging caregivers across the lifespan. And I just had a great opportunity to meet so many wonderful professionals, really across the spectrum of caregiving. And Liddy Manson is the director of the Aging Well Hub at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. The Aging Well Hub is a cross-sector collaborative whose goal is to connect companies, agencies, organizations, providers, and funders to create a shared framework for developing and deploying innovative products and services to enhance the lives of older adults. And Liddy, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You know, it wasn't too long ago that we were out in San Francisco and at the National Alliance Conference, and I know you had a terrific presentation. But before we get into that, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and your wealth of experience in the senior industry?
Sure. So I've spent about 25 years in the technology industry in one manner or another. The first 10 were very much focused on the emerging interactive media market, starting in roughly 1995 when the Internet was born. In 2009, I started a company called Be Close, which used smart home technology to support people who are aging in place. So we called it the next generation of the I fallen and I can't get up button. And the inspiration for that was very much watching my parents struggle with making decisions about how to age in a way that would make them happy and also balance their safety. My father had type 1 diabetes, which he'd had for 40 years, and was starting to have some health complications associated with that. And he'd been a doctor his whole life. My mother wasn't used to taking care of him because he'd always taken care of himself. Suddenly things started to change very quickly for them. And my feeling was, given what I know about technology, this process shouldn't be so hard. I was a remote caregiver. The process shouldn't be so hard. So that company was acquired by a company called Alarm.com about 3 years ago. I've been doing consulting in and out of the technology and aging industry, and I've been running the Aging Well Hub at Georgetown for about 9 months now. The Aging Well Hub is set at Georgetown's business school. So we're very much focused on innovation in aging, and we're very focused on how those people who run organizations that either run businesses or other types of advocacy and support organizations can get innovative products into their hands faster and get them into the hands of people who need them. So that's our focus. We try to support organizations in partnering. We try to address some of the issues around fragmentation of care, and we are looking always on the horizon for different ways to support people as they're aging. One of the areas that we're most focused on is caregivers. Caregivers do a tremendous amount of work, and we're very focused on caregivers who are not paid, so family caregivers,
Sure.
spouses, children. They contribute about $500 billion worth of labor to the elder care market, which is rarely recognized, and which is a tremendous economic contribution that has huge implications for the industry as it evolves and as our population of older adults grows.
Oh goodness, there's so many directions I want to go, but I'm thinking back to when you mentioned starting out in 1995 with technology, right, as the internet was booming, and today in 2018, I mean, I would imagine you've seen so many different trends that it could be mind-boggling to see where technology is going today.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we enjoy most is telling our kids what it was like when we were in college, and we would travel and try to meet people, and often you would just sit outside the train station for an entire afternoon waiting for your friend to come in, and that's the way it was. You brought a book, and our kids just can't imagine how you could live in a world where you couldn't jump on the internet, get an answer to everything you wanted, where you couldn't text people and reach people immediately. It's really funny to think about how quickly the world has changed. I think as you look at the aging population, there's a little bit of a divide of haves and have-nots. I think that's going to change quickly as the boomers get older, and I think people will use technology more than they have been. I really see a split in technology that has become part of daily life, like cell phones, and sort of institutionalized caregiving technology, which gets distributed through healthcare channels. There's a bit of a split there, and I think there are a lot of people in the aging industry who say, technology is too complicated. But when they actually take a step back and look at your average 80-year-old, they're using technology every day, whether they're aware of it or not. Or they're using technology that didn't exist 15 years ago every day, whether they're aware of it or not. So it's powering so much of what we do.
Yeah, I think sometimes when I have conversations about technology and I look at my own caregiving experience, my partner was 20 years older than me, so his technological expertise was a little bit different than mine. But when you can find that avenue where you can bridge the gaps of our because we all have our own technological expertise, then I think you have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and when I look at it specifically as it relates to caregiving, some of these sort of hidden technology changes are going to really transform caregiving. So, for example, Amazon and Walmart and e-commerce and how quickly you can get your hands on essential items really changes the caregiving game. So you don't have to spend as much time running errands. Things can get delivered to your house for roughly the same amount of money. And that trend is going to accelerate really rapidly. I think that we're going to see tremendous change in retail and how retail products are delivered. So I think that that's something that for a caregiver really makes a big difference. I think cell phones obviously make an enormous difference. Even 20 years ago, people who are aging in place typically didn't have a phone in their pocket all the time.
Right.
Now they typically do. So it means that you can reach them much more easily, and importantly, they can reach you. A simple the technologies that are evolving that I think will move very quickly are things like Alexa, the Amazon voice activated. I think all of these products that now can be voice activated again makes an enormous change for anyone who's sight restricted or who has digital dexterity issues. Suddenly their caregivers can communicate with them in a way that didn't exist before. So I think it's a very, very exciting time. I also look at the power of music. So the ability to allow people to get access to music that they love very easily, for a caregiver, a home health aide or a companion care worker to come into the house and allow people to listen to the music that they loved most when they were young, that has a tremendous healing effect and therapeutic effect. And again, 10 years ago, that just wasn't possible. It was very difficult to do. So I think we need to be creative about how we think about benefits.
Oh, goodness. As I think of the topic of the National Alliance for Caregiving's conference, engaging caregivers across the lifespan, and we think of, and we look at technology as it relates to lifespan, it does really impact where the future is going with care, especially in care in the home.
Right, and I think, there's obviously tremendous advances in how technology can support chronic disease. Mm-hmm. So the advances just in diabetes care, I have a daughter with type 1 diabetes. What she is doing today, what didn't exist 10 years ago and certainly wasn't on the radar screen for my father. Mm-hmm. So the ability to stay connected around disease management is really powerful because you can partner much more easily. And, the real key with chronic disease is allowing people to be successful with self-management. So if you can give them tools to make self-management easier, they will do better, they'll feel better, and they'll go to the doctor less frequently.
And we certainly would want to prefer not to have to go to the doctor. That's a topic.
Right, because every time you go to the doctor, you're exposed to germs and all kinds of things that if you're in a frail state, you really don't want. So, and that technology, the technology to support chronic disease is getting cheaper and cheaper and more accessible. So, my daughter does a lot of stuff through her iPhone and really can kind of get a sense of trends in her disease just by pushing a couple of buttons. That didn't exist 5 years ago.
Well, and it kind of gives you a sense of that a little bit more independence, that you can do a few more things.
Right, and so as she goes off to college, I'm not going to have to call her every day. I can just see what's going on, and if there's some kind of troubling trend, I'll give her a call, but otherwise she can be pretty independent. And so, the same is true if you're a caregiving partner to somebody who's older than you, or if you're a spouse partner trying to learn a new disease as someone's been diagnosed with it. It's an overwhelming task, and there's a tremendous amount of support that's available now because of the internet and because of technology trends.
I think you had mentioned that you do a lot of work with organizations and businesses and trends in that area. Caregiving is, I like to say that it has no boundaries. It has no economic boundaries. It has no gender boundaries, no orientation boundaries. It's in every neighborhood. It's in every boardroom. And I think we're seeing trends today that organizations and businesses are paying attention to the needs of their working family caregivers.
I think that's true. I think particularly the younger working family members. So, the statistic now is that 17% of millennials are caring for an older family member. And I think as large corporations see their young workforce get crippled by these responsibilities, I think they'll wake up a little bit more. I think that, to date, the real burden of caregiving, by and large, has been borne silently by caregivers.
Yes.
And I think there are all kinds of, I don't know if I want to say stigmas or biases attached to it, but a 57-year-old woman whose company whose company's profitability is changing is not likely to walk into HR and say, I need some time off to take care of my mom.
Right.
That's the person who's trying to hold on to their job. Mm-hmm. And so the people that tend to be caregivers are also the people who tend to be the most vulnerable in the workplace. And that's a really challenging issue, which I think will change as caregiving becomes more universal and as the age of caregivers starts to get younger and, frankly, more vocal.
Well, and
so I think that's an enormous economic trend that I think is going to be driving a lot of business decisions over the next 15 years.
I always like to reflect on analogies, and I think back into the 70s when businesses started to recognize the child care crisis. And what did they do? They created daycares. A lot of the major corporate created daycares, and out of that, FMLA was born. Of course, that wasn't enacted into law until to the 90s. But there's such a strong parallel to that as what's going on now with caregiving.
Oh, yeah, and I'm a big believer that, remember, the child care movement was led by the boomers.
Yes.
And the boomers also led the civil rights movement. The boomers are a generation that has a very strong sense of justice and a good barometer about justice. And they are not afraid to fight for what they believe in. And they will figure out a way to make it work economically for other people. So I think as we head into this era of the boomers aging, we should anticipate that they are going to be very vocal about what their needs and preferences are. And I think that will cause tremendous societal advancement. I really do, because I think that the World War II generation tended to define themselves as the strong, silent types.
Right.
And the stoic, people. The boomers are not. The boomers are very vocal, and they have always felt a mantle to advocate for the people that are coming behind them. So I think that we will find that they push us hard and are extremely innovative about how to solve this problem. I also think the boomers are going to start to advocate for end-of-life decision-making. I think we're going to start to see some civil rights issues around right to die and choosing how you end your life rather than having the medical system decide for you how you end your life. I think that's going to be an interesting trend to watch.
Oh, goodness. Boy, are we on the same page? Are we on the same page with that? That we could do a whole plethora of shows on that topic. But no, I agree with you 100% on that, Liddy.
And that has very interesting implications for caregiving. Who gets to decide what when? It's a big issue. And I think we're going to see growing advocacy around that on both sides of the issue.
Thinking back to the conference, I know it's been a few weeks, but was there anything that stuck out? Any takeaways that you had from the conference that stuck in your mind?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, I already talked about sort of the economic size of the unpaid caregiver workforce,
right,
which is enormous. And in my opinion, it's not scalable. So I think we are at the most generous ratio right now of free caregivers to those who need care. Mm-hmm. And so I think the healthcare system is going to have to change rapidly to adjust to that new ratio. I think the other thing that I took away from the conference, which is something we discovered as we developed our caregiver journey map, is that still in the healthcare and the aging care delivery world, typically, journeys are described from the point of view of the provider, not from the point of view of the patient or the caregiver. So a disease state, for example, will be defined by stages of medication that are required, rather than by how it feels as a patient to be experiencing that disease and how it feels as a caregiver to be trying to support that disease. And so a lot of what we're focusing on at the Hub is trying to flip that model on its head, become more human-centered in how we talk about long-term care and caregiving and receipt of care. You know, how do the residents perceive their care? How is that described in a way that isn't, you're now in phase 2 of type 2 diabetes where you're insulin dependent, but you're at a stage where you can't manage it all the time just with diet. That's demoralizing. Your caregivers tend to worry more. What's that family dynamic? That dialogue is still very much in its infancy in the industry, and that makes it frustrating to be a caregiver because the language that's used and the way that healthcare is described tends to ignore the caregiver. And I think that's going to need to change over time for real partnerships to take place.
Oh, goodness, we're hitting on a lot of great subjects because I'm 4 years past my caregiving experience now, and I see this issue through the lens of leadership and communication. Leadership on the sense of healthcare providers, doctors, physicians, people on the healthcare team being able to communicate effectively And
Right.
then on the caregiver side, I see the caregivers having the comfort and the ability to advocate to their healthcare team, because they really are what I like to say, the CEO, the chief everything officer. The caregivers are the ones who really they're the ones who have the most information, and they need to be the ones engaged in the healthcare as well.
It's true, but they're also the ones that are the most pinched for time, and they're the ones that are juggling the most. They tend to be caregivers to more than one person. Increasingly their children are moving back into their house. So they've got a lot on their plate, and that's where organizations like the National Alliance for Caregiving are really critical, and why we try to work with them as an academic institution is to try to get insights about what the reality of caregiving is out into the healthcare delivery field, so that the healthcare delivery field can do a better job of partnering with caregivers. Because to ask caregivers to do all that advocacy on their own, I think is not realistic. And honestly, having been a caregiver myself, I don't think it's fair. So I think that's where there's a lot of work to be done, and where we're trying to create tools for caregivers to have the mechanisms they need to advocate and to essentially train professional healthcare delivery people about what really is required in order for this journey to be happy and successful.
Oh, goodness. I agree with you 100%, and anything I could do to help, because I like to be involved in these projects. What we do on the Whole Care Network here is we try to share stories, because I believe through story sharing, it's where diversity meets the road to combat a common cause.
Right.
And caregivers can really connect with stories, and that it just comes back full circle. That one of the reasons why I've created the Whole Care Network is to be able to share information and stories and foster change, and you're certainly doing that.
Yeah, and I think, again, as we look at it, I think there's definitely some justice, urgency in trying to get more education and support for caregivers, but there's also a tremendous economic reason to do it. Right. And I think that that's something we need to make sure, and that's given that we're at a business school, we tried never to lose sight of that economic argument, because that is what drives business. And as long as we can translate what we believe is morally right into economic arguments, it's likely that things will move forward more quickly. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do.
When you put a dollar sign in front of a social issue, then all of a sudden people take notice. That's right.
Well, I think they take notice around justice as well, but
right.
They might be quicker to act.
Right.
And it might be easier to pull together cross-sector groups of people around economic issues than around moral issues. Sometimes the moral issues can be a little more complicated. The economic issues tend to be shared.
Yeah, I guess I could qualify that by saying it's the policy makers, the policy changers. When you put a dollar sign to it, then it maybe that connects just a little.
Well, and dollar signs are easy to measure too.
Yes.
So for those kinds of organizations that have come of age, really wanting to measure everything, putting a dollar sign against it makes it easier for them to do that. So again, it's all about giving people the tools they need to be successful in this journey of reinventing caregiving and reinventing care.
Oh, goodness. Well, I could continue on all morning and afternoon chatting with you, but we just got a couple of minutes left. This has just been delightful. Could you tell our listeners how they could learn more about your work? And goodness, and if they have any questions, that they'd like to get in contact with you?
Yep. So we have a website, agingwellhubs.org, which they can come to anytime and see the work that we're doing. We primarily work on issues that are focused or that are oriented toward businesses and professional organizations. We do a little bit less of consumer advocacy just because we don't have the staff or the setup to do it right now. But we work very extensively with the National Alliance for Caregiving. We work with AARP. We work with the N4A, the National Association of Area Units on Aging. So most of our work is available for people through aging organizations in their area, but also they can come to our website and work with any organization that they're partnering with to get more of our work out into the ecosystem.
Well, Liddy, it's been a delight chatting with you today, and through your work at the Aging Well Hub, Georgetown McDonough School of Business, you're certainly somebody who's creating healing ties all around us. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. It was great talking to you.
Okay. Well, that does it for this episode of Healing Ties. I'm Chris McClellan, the Bowtie Guy. I'm creating a life to love after caregiving ends through radio, writing, travel, advocacy, and being with awesome people like Liddy Manson. Healing Ties is a part of the Whole Care Network. Check us out online at thewholecarenetwork.com. We'll see you for another episode of Healing Ties real soon. Bye-bye.